What's up, everyone? And today I'm bringing a deck profile on my Infernoids. Now, Infernoids is a very interesting deck that's basically more or less a deck of DD Crows. And thankfully, a couple of the cards actually got reprinted, so the deck is much more affordable. And without further ado, let's just get right into it. First, I run 3 Infernoid Decatron. Decatron is one of the, well, it's the only Infernoid monster that you can just normal summon out. If Decatron is normal or special summon, you can send one Infernoid monster from your deck to the graveyard. Except Decatron, and if you do, increase this card's level by that level. And if you do, this card name becomes that monster's original name and replaces this effect with that effect. So basically, it's 3 more copies of whatever you want. You send Harmadic, it becomes Harmadic. You send Deviati, it becomes Deviati. The only thing it doesn't copy is the attack and defense, which is a little bit unfortunate, but basically, it's a foolish burial to where you gain the effects, so really powerful. And it's also, interestingly enough, a tuner, which is kind of shocking considering this deck doesn't even have a tuner. Next, I run 2 Infernoid Harmadic. Now, all the Infernoids have a summoning condition. Unlike Decatron, they cannot be normal summoned. They must first be special summoned by banishing a certain amount of Infernoid monsters from your hand or graveyard. And they can be summoned, and some of them can be summoned from the grave by this effect. Now, Harmadic, once per turn, you can target one monster on the field, destroy it, and this card cannot attack the turn you activate this effect. Now, during your opponent's turn, you contribute one monster, then target one card to your opponent's graveyard, banish it, and this is a quick effect. Now, all the Infernoids have that last effect to DD Crow, essentially, any card in your opponent's graveyard, and all of them have to banish a Infernoid to summon themselves out. Now, you may think that that makes the deck pretty bad, but in a way, it makes it kind of good because it's easy to get Infernoids to the grave through the effect of the fusion monster and the. I also run 2 Infernoid Patrulia. Patrulia, like Harmonic, only requires 1 Infernoid monster. And additional thing, one downside to the summoning is that it's not infinite, as in basically that summoning can only happen while the total levels and ranks are 8 or lower on your field. So if you have a rank 8 monster or level 8 monster on the field, you cannot summon this. Now, there is a card that in this deck that sort of basically counteracts that restriction. And Patrulia, you can target one spell trap card on the field, destroy it. Although, like Harmonic, you cannot attack the turn that you activate this effect. I also run the 1 Sajet. Sajet requires the banishing of 2 Infernoid monsters to summon itself. And all the rest of the Infernoid monsters can be summoned from the hand or graveyard by this way. So basically, if you activate a Foolish Burial sending Sajet, you can banish a Harmadic and, Deviati to special summon it from the grave. So it doesn't have to be in your hand to summon it, unlike the Patrulia and Harmadic. Now, Sajet can banish one monster from your opponent's extra deck, and once per turn, like all the others, you can quick effect, tribute one monster, banish one from your opponent's grave. Sajet's more or less the weakest out of all the Infernoid monsters because all it does is banish one monster from your opponent's extra deck, and they do get to choose, so it's not like you get to pick which one to banish. Now I run 3 Infernoid Sightmoss. Sightmoss is easily one of the best Infernoid monsters. First off, like Sajet, it requires 2 Infernoid monsters to summon. And if this card attacks opponent's monster, this effect can be acted at the end of the battle phase. Banish one card on the field. So rather than banishing one monster from your opponent's extra deck, you just banish one card on the field. Next, I run 3 Infernoid Anoku. Anoku, when it is summoned, you can basically nuke the field of all monsters. And Anoku, unlike Sightmoss, requires 3 Infernoid monsters. Next, I run 3 Deviati. Deviati is more or less the opposite of Anoku, to where it can destroy all spells and traps on the field. So Anoku and Deviati are very important to get on the field because basically one's a board wipe, one's a Harpy's Feather Duster, and both of them require 3 Infernoid monsters, or banishing 3 Infernoid monsters from the grave in order to summon them, as well as having the additional quick effect to trigger one monster Now, the one additional cool thing about Onoko and Deviati is that they don't have the same effects as the other Infernoids to DD Crow. Now, Onaku, during either player turn, when a spell trap card is activated, you can trigger one monster to negate the activation. And for Deviati is a monster. So Onoku is a spell trap negation and Deviati is a monster negation. Now, so if you're going first, which this is a going second build because obviously you want cards to DD Crow from your opponent's graveyard. If you have you basically want to set up Deviati or Onoku because those are basically your negations for the deck. Next, I do run the one Destrudo, the Lost Dragon's Fizzer. This comes up occasionally, but if anything, it's a free summon. You can make synchro plays in this deck. It doesn't come up, I'd say, too often, but it did come up once in practice. I run 3 Psyframe Gear Gamma, and of course the 1 Psyframe Driver. The good thing about the Psyframes is that they can also negate hand traps, which is really cool, because sometimes those hand traps can be pretty annoying. Moving on to the spells, and I'd definitely say the spells are kind of more interesting than the monsters. First, I run the 3 Void Imagination, which is, I'd like to say is kind of the best out of all the voids, kind of loosely, because the void spells and traps are actually pretty good. Void Imagination allows your Infernoid monsters that you control, whose original levels are 2 or higher, to become level 1. And all battle damage they inflict to your opponent is halved. While it does have the battle damage you inflict, Void Imagination is really helpful for allowing you to swarm the field of the Infernoid monsters, because all those Infernoid monsters have that effect to where you can only use that effect when the total levels that you control are 8 or less. So with this, you can basically fill your board with Infernoid monsters. And it has a secondary effect to where you can send this card to the graveyard to fusion summon 1 Infernoid fusion monster from your extra deck. And the cool thing about this is if your opponent controls a monster that was special summoned from the extra deck and you do not, which is most oftentimes the case, you can also use up to 6 monsters from your deck as fusion material. So those are just more Infernoids that you can keep on summoning. Next, I play the 3 Void Banishment. Void Banishment, you can discard 1 card to add 1 Void spell trap from your deck to your hand. Most oftentimes it's going to be a Void Imagination or your Void Feast. And once per turn, if an Infernoid monster you control battles an opponent's monster, after damage calculation, you can send this card to the graveyard to banish those monsters. You mainly want it for the search effect of the Void Imagination. Well, to search out your Void Imagination. Next, I play 3 Layer of Darkness. Now, Layer of Darkness is really cool in this deck because it turns the maintenance, or not the maintenance, the cost of the Infernoid monster's quick effect DD Crow effect into an actual advantage. So, all face-up monsters on the field become dark, and once per turn, if you attribute a monster you control to activate a card effect, you contribute 1 dark monster your opponent controls instead, even though you do not control it. And once per turn during the end phase, special summon as many torment tokens as possible to the turn player's field and defense position, up to the number of monsters attributed this turn while this card is face up. And since the Infernoids, or at least all of them outside of Onoku and Deviati, tribute to essentially banish 1 card from your opponent's graveyard, if you have Lair of Darkness, you can do that and use one of your opponent's monsters. And the additional cool thing about that is that it tributes. So, let's say they got Dragoon on the field. You can literally just tribute the Dragoon away, because tributing monsters away is a form of removal that really hits most boss monsters that just have destruction, immunity, targeting protection. So, definitely really helps get over those problematic cards, and it can also generate tokens too. Next, I run 3 Pot of Extravagance. You definitely want to run Pot of Extravagance over Prosperity because the draw 2 is just much better than the Excavate 1 card out of the top 6. More so because your extra deck for the most part doesn't really matter because the Infernoids are more or less boss monsters themselves. Look at their attack points. Not attack points, their attack. I'd much rather draw 2, and because outside of Tiara, you don't really use the extra deck too often. It does come up from time to time, like I said, with Destrudo, but ultimately, I'd rather draw 2 than the Excavate. Man, I never thought I'd be able to say this. I play 3 Raigeki. Yeah, I can actually say that now. Raigeki is obviously a very powerful going second card because it's just a board wipe that's not even once per turn. So if you open with 2 and then negate 1, well, you can still Raigeki. And it really gives a lot of support for these going second decks like Infernoids. Of course, when going second, you also want 3 Dark Ruler No More. Now, another option you can obviously play is Forbidden Droplet, and I would run that over Dark Ruler No More, but I don't have any Forbidden Droplet. Sad. I also run the 1/1 for 1 because Decatron is level 1, and it can also just get another Infernoid in the grave. Whether it's in your hand, in your grave, it doesn't matter for the Infernoids. Also run the 1 Foolish Burial because you want to get as many Infernoid monsters in your grave as possible. Moving on to the traps. Now, one option that you could possibly play is Skill Drain. I don't have any. I only have like the 1 Skill Drain because that card's like $30 for. Not really even worth $30. But Skill Drain is an option if you don't want to play it. But I do play 1 Void Feast. Now, Void Feast, you can send 1 Void Spell Trap from your hand or face-up field to the graveyard. Special summon up to 3 Infernoid monsters from your deck whose total levels equal exactly 8, ignoring the summoning conditions. So basically that whole effect of you can only special summon an Infernoid monster if the total levels is 8 or less. Well, this just bypasses all that. Moving on to the extra deck. The extra deck is a lot harder to talk about, considering we don't really use it a whole lot, so it's a little bit more loose. You can change cards out if you want. But I run 3 Infernoid Tiara. I run 3 because Pot of Extravagance. Now, Tiara, when it is fusion summoned, you can apply effects in sequence based to the number of materials. If you use 3 for a fusion summon, each player sends 3 cards from the extra deck to the grave. 5, each player sends top 3 from the deck to the graveyard. 8, each player returns up to 3 of their banished cards to the graveyard. And 10, each player sends their entire hand to the graveyard. Now, 10, you're not likely to actually get off. 8 sometimes, but the 3 and 5 usually happen pretty often. And the cool thing about the sending 3 to the graveyard, that does trigger the effect of the 3 copies of Elder Entity and a test you run. Now, a test when it is sent to the graveyard, you can target 1 card on the field, destroy it. So most often, you really just want to send your 3 Elder Entity. Just send your 3 Elder Entity in a test, because they're not a once per turn, which is really cool. Also run the 1 Herald of the Arclight, a TG Hyper Librarian, a Clearwing, and a Cypher Lord of Menka. Now, you can really swap this out for any different kind of tuners you want, like the tuners, or not really tuners, but the Synchro Monsters themselves aren't really too important. Those are just like good Synchro Monsters for the levels that I am most likely to get. Like, you can get the Herald of Arclight with Decatron and Harmodic. TG, you can get it with Patrulia and Decatron. And Clearwing and Cypher Lord or Mega are easier to get with the Strudo. I run the 1 Barricade Board Blocker since we do run a lot of continuous spells and field spells like the Lair of Darkness and the Void cards. I run the 1 Blackluster Soldier of Chaos. Soldier of Chaos is a good level 3 to run, especially since a lot of your monsters are higher leveled, especially the Deviati and Onoku, which definitely helps with the Soldier of Chaos effect to gain 1500 attack, make a second attack during each battle phase, or banish 1 card on the field. I also run the 1 Nightmare of Unicorn, which is another good Link 3. 1 Cyframe Lord Lambda. I mainly run it because it's a Link 2, and you do run Cyframe Gear, or not Cyframe Gear, Cyframe Gamma. And lastly, the 1 Access Code Talker. So that's it for my Infernoid deck profile. Let me know what you think of it, Infernoid. I think it's a pretty cool deck. Let me know in the comments, and I will see you in the next video I make. Bye.